Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 18. The rest of Khuzistan. A few days were spent in dealing with post-victory matters at Tustar, the treatment of the wounded, the burial of the dead, the collection and distribution of booty, the establishment of local administration. Then the contingent from Kufa returned to Kufa with Amr bin Yasir, and Abu Musa set off with his army for Sus, taking the captive Hormuzan with him. The army arrived at Sus to find a sizable Persian force occupying the city, consisting partly of the survivors of Hormuzan's army, but mainly of fresh troops from other provinces, augmented by the local inhabitants. Sus was, and still is, known to the Persians by the name of Shush. The most famous thing about Sus was the bones of Prophet Daniel which lay in the city. The first resting place of the prophet is believed to have been Babylon, but Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled Babylon in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, had permitted the prophet's remains to be transferred to Sus as a water blessing. That is, the inhabitants prayed by Daniel for water whenever there was a shortage, and believed that it was through his intercession that their prayers were answered. Now in the burial city of Daniel, the Persians prepared for a siege under Shahryar, brother of Hormuzan. The Muslims invested the city and the usual sequence of sally and attack was taken up. Many were killed on both sides, and it appeared that the city would be able to continue its resistance for a long time. Then one day, a Persian Zoroastrian priest appeared on the wall of the city and called to the Muslims. O Arabs, we know from our ancestors and our wise men that Sus will not be taken except by Dajjal, or by a people among whom there is Dajjal. If you have Dajjal among you, you will conquer us. If not, do not bother to besiege us. Dajjal is the Arabic rendering of what in the English language is known as Antichrist, or a quack or impostor. This old belief obviously existed among the Zoroastrians too, but Islam had cleared the minds of the faithful of all old superstitions. And Abu Musa was not the man to worry about Dajjal. So he continued his attacks, but success still eluded him. And once again the Persian priest appeared on the wall to repeat what he had said earlier about Dajjal. After this, a fierce encounter took place near one of the gates, which continued till after sunset. But here too there was no decision one way or the other. Then Abu Musa received a very bright and very daring suggestion from Siyah, the Persian commander of the body of knights which had accepted Islam before the Battle of Tustar. These Persians had fought bravely in the siege of Tustar, and were now to play a vital role in the conquest of Sus. Plans were formulated and preparations made to take Sus by guile as well as force. The night passed uneventfully. As the first light of dawn appeared, the Persian sentries on the wall by the gate saw a Persian officer with his uniform stained with blood, lying on the ground near the gate. There had been fighting close to this spot, and the commander of the guard at once ordered that the gate be opened, and a few men go out and bring in the wounded Persian, who had obviously been outside all night, waiting for help. Poor fellow! A little later the gate was opened, and 2 or 3 soldiers approached the fallen officer, but they had not yet reached him when the apparently wounded Persian officer leapt to his feet. It was none other than Siah, who had donned his Persian uniform, stained it with blood, and pretended to be a Persian casualty. In a few moments he had disposed of the Persian soldiers, who were coming to pick him up. The next instant Siah had rushed to the gate, killing the sentry who stood by it, and got in before the rest of the guards could recover their senses. Here he was immediately joined by another Persian officer, Khusro by name, who had concealed himself nearby while Siah was awaiting to be saved. And now the two stood with their backs to the half-open gate, fighting off the soldiers who strove to get to the gate and close it. The number of Persians increased rapidly as the alarm was raised, but none could get past the valiant Muslim Persian champions, who slew every man who came within reach of their bloody swords. The struggle increased in intensity, and the Persians attacked with frenzy to knock down the defenders of the gate. At last, as Siah and Khusro were about to collapse from exhaustion, the leading company of Abu Musa's army rushed into the breach and took on the Persian soldiers. The Muslim thrust could not be held. They drove deeper into the city, scattering the Persian defenders, and soon were well established in the nearer sector of Sus. At this stage of battle the Persian commander sued for peace, and his surrender was accepted by Abu Musa, who wished to spare further bloodshed. Sus was taken, thanks to Siah. It was now about the middle of 20 Hijri. Abu Musa made no secret of his admiration for the valor of Siah and his gallant Persian knights, which he had held earlier of the Persians who fought against the Muslims. "O one-eyed one," he said to Siah, "you and your comrades are not as we thought you were." Siah accepted the compliment but complained that he and his fellows were not being paid as well as the best of the Arab warriors, and also pointed out to Abu Musa that they had come to the help of the Muslims when the Muslims needed help most. Abu Musa wrote of this to Umar, and the Caliph ordered higher pay for the Persian knights, 6 of whom, including Siah, were awarded 2,500 dirhams per annum, while 100 of them got 2,000 dirhams. What the rest of them were given is not recorded, but perhaps only this number of the original 300 had survived the battles of Tustar and Sus. Abu Musa also wrote to the Caliph about the remains of the Prophet Daniel, which had not been buried but just lay in a temple, and the Caliph instructed the governor to see that the Prophet's remains were properly enshrouded and buried. Abu Musa had the river Shahur diverted, had the Prophet buried in its bed, and then let the water run again in its course. The exact location of the grave of Prophet Daniel is unknown. Under the instructions of Caliph Umar, the Muslims dug 13 graves and buried the Prophet in one grave, and filled the other 12 with dirt, so the exact location remains unknown. Dr. Safar Hawali writes in The Day of Wrath, In Islamic history, there is a well-known event narrated by Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Abi Shaybah, al-Bayhaqi, Ibn Abi Dunya, and others, from the second-generation Muslims who participated in the conquest of the city of Tustar, including Abul Aliya and Mutraf ibn Malik. The particular incident that concerns us here is that the conquering Muslim army discovered the tomb of Daniel. They found his body lying on its bier totally unchanged except for a few hairs on the back of his head. At his head was a scroll which they took and brought to Umar, who called Ka'b al-Ahbar to translate it into Arabic. Abu Aliya says, I was the first man to read the Arabic translation. The narrator from Abu Aliya states, I asked Abu Aliya what was in it. He replied, all of your history and affairs, the melody of your speech, and what is yet to happen. The only place of any military importance which now remained outside Muslim hands in Khuzistan was Junde Sabur, another town built by the great Sabur, who appears to have marked the glory of his reign by building cities. Junde Sabur was known to contain a strong garrison, and while this garrison held, the province of Khuzistan could not be said to belong to the Muslims. So, following the instructions of the Caliph, Abu Musa sent a force under Aswad bin Rabi'a, an early companion who also had the nickname of Muqtarib, to take Junde Sabur. Abu Musa himself returned to Basra with the rest of his army. Muqtarib besieged Junde Sabur and several attempts were made to storm the city but without success. Then one day during a lull in the operation, when all was quiet, the gates of the city opened. The inhabitants of the city emerged unarmed and apparently without fear. Cattle were driven out to graze, and shopkeepers began to set up their stalls everywhere. The Muslims stared in amazement at the unwarlike scene, the very peacefulness of which held them back from attacking the Persians. The Muslims asked what was going on, and the Persians said, You offered us peace and we have accepted it, and agreed to pay the jizya in return for your protection. We did not do so, said the Muslims. We do not lie, said the Persians. Upon inquiry, it was found that someone had shot an arrow from the Muslim side into the town, to which was attached a message offering the garrison peace if it would surrender and pay the jizya. Upon further inquiry, it was found that the arrow was shot by a slave named Mukannaf. The Muslims felt that this was going a bit too far, and that any negotiation of terms should be done at a higher level of command. He is only a slave, said the Muslims. We do not know your slaves from your free men, replied the Persians. We only know that we receive an offer of peace, and we accepted it and have stood by it. You can break your word if you wish. This was rather a severe taunt, and no Muslim was prepared to break his word or the word of his brother. So the Muslim commander wrote to the Caliph about the matter, while a sort of truce was maintained, subject to the decision of the Caliph. The Caliph's reply, when received, read, Allah has given importance to truthfulness. Be true to them, and again be true to them, and leave them in peace. Muqtarib accepted the surrender of Junde Sabur on the payment of the jizya, and after making certain organizational arrangements for the Muslim administration of the district, returned to Basra. Following this action, Abu Musa sent one column eastwards which occupied Zut and Sanbil, and a second one northwards which occupied Galbania, between Sus and Seymara. There was no opposition at these places. All Khuzistan, the plain which stretched to the foothills of the Zagros mountains, was now in Muslim hands. On his return from Sus, Abu Musa dispatched Hormuzan to Medina with an escort, which included 2 companions, Uns bin Malik and Ashraf bin Qais, the former being the brother of one of the 2 venerable companions killed by Hormuzan at Sus. This was a strange and less than welcome experience for Hormuzan. He, a prince, a lord and son of a lord, he who had spent his life in palaces and in the company of royalty, and was himself one of the minor royalty, was now led into the barren desert of Arabia as a captive, with certain death ahead of him. He may also have worried about being in the company of Uns bin Malik, because Arab vindictiveness had always been well known, but nevertheless his fertile brain exercised itself in seeking ways and means of escaping the punishment which lay in wait for him. He was a crafty fellow. At last the journey ended, and they entered Medina. The escort, wishing to dazzle the Caliph by the sight of a Persian prince, looking like a Persian prince, dressed Hormuzan in his court regalia, robes of velvet and gold, and placed upon his head his coronet of gold, studded with sapphires. Thus bedecked, Hormuzan was led to Umar's house. Umar was not there. The escort asked some people about the whereabouts of the Caliph, and was told that he was in the mosque receiving a delegation from Kufa. They went to the mosque but found it empty. The Kufan delegation had finished its business with the Caliph and departed. They came out, found some boys playing in the street, and asked them if they had seen the Caliph. The boys told the group that the Caliph was in the mosque. They went in again and saw a man lying fast asleep in the right side of the mosque, wearing clothes of coarse material and with his cloak folded into an inadequate pillow under his head. In his left hand the sleeping man held a whip. Hormuzan noticed the reclining figure, and then his gaze traveled around the rest of the mosque. He was looking for the great Caliph who had shaken the empire of Persia to its foundations, but there was no one else there. "Where is Umar?" he asked his escort. "This is he," they replied, pointing at the sleeping man. Hormuzan stared in bewilderment at the poorly dressed man sleeping on the rough matted floor. "Where is his guard?" he asked. "And where is his chamberlain?" "He has no guard and no chamberlain. He has no secretary. He has no office." "Then he should be a prophet," observed the Persian general. "He is not," said the escort simply. By now a large crowd had collected in the mosque, attracted by the news of the arrival of the Persian general, and eager to see his meeting with Umar. The noise of the crowd awoke the Caliph, who sat up and looked with blinking eyes at the dazzling sight of the splendid attired Persian. "Hormuzan?" he inquired. "Yes," they affirmed. For a few moments the Caliph examined the Persian. Then he said, "I seek refuge with Allah from the fire, and I seek His help. Praise be to Allah who has used Islam to debase this man and his possessions." Then he turned to the crowd gathered in the mosque. "O Muslims, hold fast to this faith and be guided by the teaching of your Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let not this world lead you astray, for it is full of deceit." The escort, anxious to get the confrontation going, said to the Caliph, "He is the Prince of Ahwaz. Speak with him." "Not as long as there is anything left on him of his finery," replied Umar. They promptly took off everything that Hormuzan wore, except a few garments to cover him, and then began a dialogue between the simple Muslim and the sophisticated Persian with Mughira bin Shoba acting as translator. Everyone believed that it would not be a long dialogue, that soon Hormuzan would be sentenced to death for treachery, and that would be the end of him. They were underestimating the wily prince. "O Hormuzan," began Umar, "what do you think now of the dangers of treachery and of punishment by order of Allah?" "O Umar," replied Hormuzan, "you and we existed in olden days, and God kept us apart. And when God was neither with us nor with you, we overpowered you. But when he was with you, you overpowered us. You overpowered us during the ignorance only because of your vast numbers and our disunity. Anyway, what excuse do you plead for breaking your pledge time after time?" Umar was just being a good judge, not knowing that he was up against one of the sharpest minds of Persia. Hormuzan suddenly assumed an apprehensive look. "I fear you will kill me before I can tell you," he said. "You need have no fear on that account," the Caliph reassured him. Hormuzan then asked for a drink of water, and it was brought to him in a crude cup. He looked at the cup disdainfully for a moment. It was the sort of cup which even his slaves would not use in Persia. "I would rather die of thirst than drink from a cup like this," he snapped. The Arabs would not normally let themselves be put on with such airs, but the man was to die and so had to be honored. They brought water in a more presentable vessel, and Hormuzan took it with a trembling hand. It was obvious that he was afraid of being killed at once. He looked at Umar. "I fear I shall be killed while I am drinking this water." "You are in no danger until you have drunk the water," Umar assured him. Hormuzan at once put the cup away. Umar, not realizing his purpose, said to the Muslims, "Give it to him again. Do not inflict both death and thirst upon him." "I have no need of it," said Hormuzan calmly. "I only asked for it to save myself by it." He had the Caliph's word that he would not be harmed until he had drunk the water, and now he would not drink it. This made Umar angry. "I shall kill you," he threatened. "But you promised me safety." "You lie," roared the Caliph, seeing how he had been tricked. And now Uns bin Malik came into the conversation, and incredibly took the side of the man who had killed his brother. Such was the sense of truth and justice among the companions of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. "What he says is right," he said to the Caliph. "You promised him safety." "Woe to you, O Uns!" Umar turned sharply on the Muslim. "Would I promise safety to the killer of Majza'a and Bara? You shall find a way or I shall chastise you." Uns stood firm. "You said he was in no danger until he had spoken with you. You said he was in no danger until he had drunk the water." Others also spoke up and took the same stand. The Caliph had given an assurance of safety, and the assurance had to be honored. Umar turned in exasperation to Hormuzan. "You have deceived me, and by Allah, a Muslim is not deceived." Umar was furious at the turn that events had taken. He had no doubt in his mind that Hormuzan would have to face death for breaking his pledge not once but twice, and it would be a just punishment for such an offense. But by his clever handling of the proceedings, Hormuzan had talked his way out of what was coming to him. This did not seem right. For a few minutes there was silence, then Umar began the dialogue again. "From what land are you?" he asked the Persian general. "From Mihirjan Qazaf." "Tell me what you wish to say." "Shall I make the speech of the dead or the living?" "The speech of the living." "You have promised me safety." "You deceived me. In war the deceived have the power to retaliate." There was another pause while the onlookers watched in tense silence to see how the encounter would go. Then Umar turned to Uns bin Malik. "What do you say?" he asked. "I have left behind a great power and a determined enemy," said Uns to the Caliph. "If you kill him, the Persians will abandon all hope of life, and their strength will harden with desperation. On the other hand, if you let him live, the Persians will look forward to life." "Glory be to God!" Umar burst out impatiently. "He has killed Bara bin Malik and Majza bin Saur." "You still have no way to kill him," insisted Uns, brother of Bara. "You promised him safety." With a great effort of will Umar controlled himself. What Uns had said about the effect of the killing of Hormuzan on Persian resistance made sense. But more important than that was the principle of the thing. The Caliph had promised the accused safety, and if the accused were now killed, the Caliph would himself be guilty of the offense with which the accused was charged, that is, the breaking of a pledge. Umar relented and accepted the situation, which he could in any case not change without the naked and unprincipled use of absolute power. He would let Hormuzan live, but on his own terms. "By Allah," the Caliph turned to Hormuzan, "you shall have no safety unless you accept Islam." The message was clear to Hormuzan. He could live only as a Muslim, and having had the prospect of death as his close companion for so many weeks, and having stared in the face during the last few hours, he was thankful for life. He became a Muslim. He also settled down as a citizen of Medina and was awarded an annual pension of 2,000 dirhams. End of chapter 18.